Hello. How many boated here? How many boated? How many kayaked? How many drove? And how many are wearing their wellies this morning? Because I don't know about you, my feet are sopping wet. Pardon? I know, I was bad. If you want to lend me a pair, I'll take them. Welcome to Coffee with the Curator lecture program. I want to start by beginning to thank our sponsor, Cafe Gala, for providing the coffee today, the essential element. Yay, caffeine, woo! So if anyone wants to get up and freshen up their coffee during my short portion at the beginning here, go ahead, I won't be insulted, okay? So again, thank you, Cafe Gala, for providing the coffee for today and also for the entire program throughout the year. I am filling in for Peter Tush this morning. He is in Spain, touring with several of our volunteers and docents and having a wonderful time, and hopefully he's having a very sunny day in Spain. I'd like to begin by announcing some of our upcoming events. And this is an interesting, eclectic group of events I'm going to announce. Morning at the Museum. This is a tour specifically for families with children ages 6 to 12. And this is every first Saturday of the month from 9:30 to 11:30. What makes this special is that the museum opens up 30 minutes before the public so that families with young children can enjoy the galleries before the public comes in. This is the first Saturday of the month, and the first one will be May 7th. Really good for families that are coming in from out of town, tourists that are staying with you. This is a must-do. The Road to St. Petersburg, Jack Kerouac event, Thursday, May 12th, 6 to 7:30. It's a celebration and a discussion of Jack Kerouac's music, writings, films, and readings, and his work on the road. This is a free event here at the Dalí Museum. All these events that I'm talking about are also on our event website. Exquisite Corpse Yourself workshop at the Maureen Arts Center, Saturday, May 14th, from 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock. This also happens to be the night that we have the art walk downtown, so you can also do the Exquisite Corpse Yourself workshop and see all the galleries that are open that time. This is a selfie-inspired twist to the surrealist parlor game. I actually left samples of my Exquisite Corpse up on the table over there if you'd like to see it. The Dalí has partnered with the Maureen Arts Center and is offering a drop-in style workshop at the Maureen Arts Center. This is not here, this is at the Maureen Arts Center. Maureen and Dalí staff will take and print a full-length color photograph of you, which you will cut out paper doll style and dissect into 3 parts: head, torso, and legs. Play around with your pieces and combine them with animals, insects, aliens, superheroes, and historical figures, and more to make a stranger and possibly better surreal you. Your final creation goes home with you, and I will take a picture of it and post it on our Facebook. Drop in any time between 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock at the Maureen. I would say give yourself at least an hour. Some people stay up to 3 hours. Wine and libation will be served. Again, that's Exquisite Corpse Yourself workshop, Saturday, May 14th from 3 to 9. Okay, I'm gonna try to pronounce this correctly. Psy Cafe Swinging Ain't Just for Monkeys, Monogamy and Polygamy in the Animal Kingdom. Say that 3 times, please. Tuesday, May 17th, 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m. Psy Cafe is an informal discussion series for adults created by Secrets of the Sea Marine Exploration Center and Aquarium, formerly known as the Pier Aquarium. Its purpose is to raise awareness and satisfy people's curiosity about things scientific. Again, monogamy and polygamy in the animal kingdom. The moderator will be WMNF News Director Rob Lorai, and speakers will be Dr. Day Sheridan and Deb Castle. This is a free event yet it does require an RSVP. Dream Child, The Trial of Alice Wonderland, a play written and performed by Roxanne Fay, Tuesday, May 24th, 7 to 9 p.m. This is about Alice Slidell, Lewis Carroll's original muse. Tickets are on sale and available on the Dalí website. Any questions? And like I said, everything is listed on our website. And now, I'd like to talk to you about the person that will be giving the presentation today, for which is why you came today. Our speaker today is Craig Petersburg. Craig is our Dalí Museum School and Community Education Manager. The title and theme of his presentation today is The Mind and Creativity. Craig's background is very diverse. I would describe him as a modern-day entrepreneurial Renaissance man. Craig has a BA in art education and a master's degree in studio art painting, and he also hails from my home state, Minnesota. I think he busts the misperception of those who can't teach. For Craig, those who can teach. He can, he does, he fixes, he does everything, and he's a phenomenal teacher. His career path includes interior designer, furniture designer, draftsman. He's an art teacher in Germany and England for young youths, for adults, and in our very own Pinellas County school system as an elementary school art teacher. He is also an educational curriculum and program designer and writer, and importantly, he is a life coach promoting creativity for healthy life. I just finished a year-long project with Craig to develop the Pinellas County School Board Dalí Artmobile, known as Dalí on the Fly. Craig and I worked hand in hand putting this project together. We also worked on producing the new orientation film for kindergartners through fifth graders. It was an amazing experience to work with Craig. I would like to introduce Craig as an artist. Craig will talk a little bit about the creative process that we went through in developing the Dalí on the Fly Artmobile. Craig recently retired from Pinellas County School Board system. And I remember when I first met him, I said, why did you join the Dalí? Why didn't you just go on and pursue your career as an artist? And it was interesting what he said to me. He goes, I am madly in love with the artist Salvador Dalí. He used the words love, okay? Not necessarily his artwork. He was intellectually interested in Dalí's creative process. Craig's passion and talent lies in instructing, inspiring, and being creative. I'd like to also add one note, is that I asked Craig, after being with the Dalí for 3 years, has his creative process changed? And he said, absolutely. So I'm hoping that in the presentation that we see today, we'll see a little bit of how he has changed over the 3 years in joining the Dalí. May I please introduce artist and education manager, Craig Petersburg.
Thank you too much. Thank you. Now I've got to try to live up to that. Thank you, Yvonne. That was wonderful, amazing. I didn't know all those things about myself. It's nice to hear it. My wife probably didn't notice it either, or my daughter. Thank you for coming. This morning, I got up about 6:30 or 7 and looked out over the water of the bay and went, oh my goodness, I don't think this is going to happen today. So I really appreciate that you are here. And I appreciate all the help from Cafe Gala and the museum as well to make sure that everything was working properly this morning. Creativity is an interesting question. It hasn't been around that long. We think of it as maybe going back to cave days with those amazing drawings that were done in caves, but not so. And we're going to learn about that. The other thing is, as an educator, over the years, we got to a point where we were asked to assess creativity. And even art teachers looked at each other and went, what do we do? How do we do that? And we found out you could do that. You could come into a common understanding. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, you might be able to learn a little bit about that and apply it even to your own life. So here we go. Peter asked me, because this is a quite involved presentation on lots of moving parts, to give you a little overview. So I'm going to do that quickly. Last year I spoke on Dalinian Science, perception, and brain research, which sounds a lot drier than it was. It was a fun presentation. We're going to touch on that today at the conclusion, because this is really part 2, the sequel to that. And then talk about the definition in history, studies the creative process, how creative people differ from others, neuroscience, creativity, intelligence, and social personality, nap like Dalí, data, minimal, and conceptual art. I fit in there somewhere, you'll see. Art is the absence of fear. Create the future you want and how to create. So we even have a little tutorial at the end. Here we go. So this is the way it started. I have been here for a short time, but I have been involved with Dalí for about 3 decades. And as Yvonne said, it wasn't the finished work. It was the man trying to understand how much of his persona was real, how much was fabricated, why he did what he did, and why he lived the way he did. So it was inevitable with my last name, Petersburg, and that I would end up in this museum in St. Petersburg. So this is what inspired me for the last talk. Reading this book by Daniel Pink, A Whole New Mind. And he says that creativity is becoming increasingly important. We cannot solve problems in the old ways we've been doing things. And what he did is actually break down the last 4 centuries and show that we went from an agricultural age through the industrial, information, and finally to what he calls the conceptual age. And in the conceptual age, he believes that we're going to be much more involved with right-directed thinking, the more creative half of the brain, although you're going to learn they're not as distinctively half and half as you think. So here's a quick little slide about the right-directed thinking. It's a little all over the place. It's the world I live in most of the time. It's a little difficult for me to become left brain once in a while, and once they tag manager onto your title, you're expected to do that too, so I found a way to do it. So here's some left-directed thinking. So you see, it has been going back for centuries. I love this slide. At the end of the book, Daniel Pink starts to talk about these 6 areas and how we're evolving from function to design, from argument to story, focus to symphony, logic to empathy, seriousness to play, and accumulation to meaning. And this is how it breaks down. I looked at it through the eyes of Salvador, or I should say I in that slide. Under design, choose things in your life that will endure, that are a pleasure to use. These things seem so common sense, but we don't all live this way. Story, we are our stories. You already have it inside of you. You don't really have to create it. Writers often say, what should I write about? And they're often told, write about what you know. That's the most valid. Symphony, I'm the best at what I can't do. That's the way I've lived my life, and hasn't always worked out. Mrs. Petersburg can attest, but most of the time it does. Empathy. Empathy is neither a deviation from intelligence nor the single route to it. Play, the opposite of play is not work. It's depression. So play is important, and that's from age 0 to age 101. It doesn't matter how old you are. Play is very important. Meaning. You will only find meaning by giving meaning to life from inside yourself. And I had to read this last part too. We are not human beings on a spiritual path, but spiritual beings on a human path. That's really changed my way of thinking when I read that. It really resonated with me. So here we go. A basic definition and some history. The use of the imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. That's kind of where we all start with the idea of creativity. It doesn't say much, though. It really doesn't tell us much about it. because it can be something that is new, valuable, something we've never seen before. And it can be intangible or a physical object. It's hard to nail down. It's hard to figure it out. And that's why it's so confusing. And it's viewed differently in all parts of the world. That I found very interesting too. And having taught in a couple of different countries other than this one, I can attest to that. My work, my personal work, has been received differently in different areas of the country and in different countries. Same work. When we go back to ancient times, and you think about some of the amazing art out of Mexico, out of Egypt, out of so many places, that is just so astounding, I found that it wasn't anything about creativity for them. It was seen as an art that was a form of discovery. You are discovering, you're finding something, you're not creating it. So that concept of creativity did not exist in spite of the amazing things that we call art. They probably wouldn't have called it art. It was just part of their belief system and their language. As we evolved, we found that muses could inspire us. Female muses most of the time, apparently, because all of these are female figures, because the men were busy making the stuff. Anyway, they would inspire us, but from the gods. It came from a higher source. They even could make a chart, give them names, their domains, and an emblem so that if you saw them in a painting or in a book somewhere, you would know which one it was and what it was about. Most of these are not about visual art. It was much more about writing and music at that time. And then we arrive at the Renaissance. Pretty quick history, isn't it? We're up to the Renaissance already. Now creativity is seen not as a conduit from the divine, but the abilities of great men. This was a huge shift on the planet. And it didn't happen everywhere at this time. It happened only in certain parts of the planet, but gradually spread across the whole world. The leading intellectual movement became humanism. And that's when they valued intellect and achievement of the individual. You can see a piece of Leonardo's there, very, very famous. And the Renaissance of humanism involves individualism, worldliness, learning, antiquity, and reform. Leonardo put it this way: all great acts of genius began with the same consideration. Do not be constrained by your present reality. That's 500 years ago, and basically that's my message today. I'm just going to say it a little bit differently than he did. But this humanism became a ceaseless courtship with knowledge and creation. And now skipping all the way to the 19th century. It wasn't until the 19th century that we had people do what I'm doing today. Get in front of a group of peers or just in front of a bunch of people and start talking about their creative process, how they thought of something, how they developed it, how they discovered it, the experiments they used. So it was mathematicians and scientists that were doing this, not artists. And they really evolved to the point that creativity became something we had to put a word onto. This man not only studied the creative process, but wrote one of the first journals about the art of thought in 1926. So according to everything we've talked about so far, this is very recent. And he made models of the creative process. So this is the first real attempt to break it down and see what it is. He had 5 categories: preparation, incubation, intimation, illumination or insight, and verification. Let's take a look at each one of these. The first one, preparation, is when you explore the problem's dimensions. You can do that in many different ways. You can try different media in art. You can write and rewrite and edit. You can do experiments. There's so many different ways you can investigate things. But you need to prepare something at the beginning to have a direction. So it is the key. Incubation. This is when you're internalizing things and your unconscious mind is actually starting to figure out the parameters of the problem. I remember sitting in class as an elementary age student and being accused of daydreaming. But I was incubating. I wish I'd have known it at the time. Because I would look out the window or sometimes close my eyes, but my mind was active. And I wish I could have somehow explained that to my teacher. She didn't get it. I only was sent to the hall once, though. That was pretty good. Okay. Intimation. This is when this creative process finally starts to come together and you get a feeling. It's not an idea. It's a feeling. It's like when you see something beautiful and you know it's beautiful, you can probably say, well, I like the color, I like the design, I like the whatever, but here's where you feel it. You feel it in here. And that's why the heart got associated with intelligence early on. It wasn't the brain. It's only recently that we're discovering it happens up there too. But we feel it down here. So it's actually an important part of creating. And any of you who do anything creative and produce anything creative, sing, play music, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. It's yours is maybe different than mine, but we all have it. Then you arrive at illumination or insight. And that's when this idea starts to be formed in your conscious mind. Now we can talk about it. I had to do this before I could create this PowerPoint. How am I going to talk about something that I feel? How am I going to explain that to somebody else? And so I had to find a way to break it down, and I did it during this portion of illumination and insight. And then somehow you have to prove it, like a scientific experiment. You have to make the piece of artwork. You have to give the lecture. You have to write the book. You have to play the instrument, whatever it is. You have to verify it so that you just have to communicate with other people. And when you do that, you are not only elaborating on it, you're applying it to something. And this is what education is on the borderline right now, and hopefully they keep going that way, is that they understand it isn't how much knowledge you have, it's what you do with it, and if you can apply it, and if you can apply it in a creative way. So as an educator and as an art educator, that's what I've been doing forever. And most art educators are the same way. But the other areas are starting to pick up and also approach it from the same way. Anything can be taught creatively. It doesn't matter the subject matter. One other thing that Wallace did is he went further than Darwin and said that the reason we're able to adapt and change and do it so quickly is because we are using this process. So instead of just a slow process, we can creatively do this all in our minds and then make a leap to the next area. So often our learning has been in leaps and not just in small steps. And right now, with the speed that everything is happening with technology, that's the way we all need to think, because you blink your eye, you're in the background already. Everything is moving so quickly. This man is obviously one of the greatest thinkers ever on the planet, and you're going to hear about a few more people that I really respect. Nikola Tesla. He said the most important product of his creative brain was invention, thinking of new things, thinking of something that didn't exist before. And you know, his dream was to tap electricity and provide it to the whole world at no cost. That didn't do well in the real world, but in the creative world, it makes us adore this man. One of my friends, Carrie Jadis, in fact, painted that mural right here in St. Pete. You might have seen it. I did not know she was doing that until one day I drove past it, and I felt so good that Tesla was being recognized, not just for the cars, but for who he was. So, how do creative people differ from others? Anyone who is creative is used to hearing, oh, that's because you're a painter. Oh, that's because you're a musician, or they're like that, they're whatever. It's interesting because we are all human beings. That seems pretty basic, and therefore we are all very similar. But for some reason, we've kind of put creative people off on the side to explain their bizarre behavior. Salvador Dalí, a prime example. But we do differ from people who don't feel creative in three ways. The first one, we have specialized knowledge. We've spent a life trying to learn about something, trying to study something. Albert Einstein had a sense of humor. He said, the more the knowledge, the lesser the ego. The lesser the knowledge, the more the ego. He wrote a formula about it. And if you plug yourself or people you know into this formula, it's very accurate. Politics aside. Okay. They are capable of divergent thinking. So this is in your frontal lobe, right here in the front, and this means I can think of 100 answers to the same question. As an art teacher, if two of the children in my class created almost identical artwork, and I didn't do this to be mean, I threw them both away, and I said, start again. One of you isn't being honest, and I don't know which one, so just do it over. You know, I never had an argument from any student in almost 40 years. They just did another thing, and they weren't the same. Another important person, J.P. Guilford, tried to make a distinction between divergent and convergent thinking. And he actually made a little chart that makes a lot of sense. His quote is, "The ultimate solutions to problems are rational. The process of finding them is not." And that's a distinction between the left and the right brain, which, as you see, as we go along, they really merge into one. I just heard from one of my colleagues yesterday when I was showing him part of this. He said, well, you know, the new thinking is the hemispheres aren't quite as important as we thought. If one side is damaged, the other side picks up those neurons, take over, and can do things. And for any of you who know my personal story, that's why I'm here, because my brain did do that. So here's where he starts. Explore, define, gather, and generate. And then he switches to the convergent side and groups, screens, prioritizes, and plan. So it's kind of what we just went through. It's just a few more steps and it clears it up a little bit more. So divergent thinking, when you hear that word, that's where you get multiple answers. That's where everybody can figure a different answer and they can all be correct. It's not the way we're trained to think, but that's really how we are. It's at least 50% of our thinking and probably more if we're creative people. Three more of my heroes. Convergent thinking is looking for a single correct solution. Einstein did that, although he took a very difficult path to get there. Einstein was troubled for many years before he came up with formulas that amazed everyone. And Dobie was always there, struggling with trying to get the answer to life. The third thing is to modulate neurotransmitters. And I wish I had known this in the third grade too. Because I was not only daydreaming, I was doing this. If I was taking a test, and this went right into college, and I had studied, I knew the information, and I drew a blank. I'm sure that's happened to all of you. It happens more at my age, but it happens to all of us. I would shut my eyes, and I would wait. I'd see the answer, I'd write it down. I was modulating my neurotransmitters. But at the time, once again, I was daydreaming to my instructors. You're taking a test, why are you just sitting there? I'd finish every test, and I got most of the answers right, and I found that this is my best way to do it, because it wasn't always jumping forward for me. So, neuroscience, we're going to just tap on this a little bit so we kind of understand how the brain works. Because this creativity is the operation of the brain during this process is very unique. And here's a great example. We're going to look at that frontal lobe again, because that's the part of the cortex where the most important for creativity. Now, if you look closely at this slide to Mr. Simpson, you will see his frontal lobe is a little preoccupied with a three-letter word. That may be true for others too, but obviously that's where it is for him, although he still considers himself a Renaissance man, as you can see from that illustration. And operating with a limited intelligence, as the X-ray shows. Okay, our working memory now. Let's talk about this, because we have memory. We're building them up from probably even before we're born, with the sounds, the feels, the textures, the color, the light, the shapes, whatever we have seen and taken in and registered in our brain. So it's a giant file cabinet we have in our brain. And sometimes it gets so big, we combine so many files, it's hard to dig through it and find something. So what this does, it allows us to have these creative and innovation thoughts arise out of our general knowledge. It might be something that's buried there and it's just difficult for us to find it. But luckily, our brain is smarter than we think, and it can figure it out on its own. Here's a wonderful example of a surgery that had an amazing recovery for this man. His working memory is amazing, responsible for processing all thought, and modeled for increased efficiency by the cerebellum. And if you know the whole story here, it was a reversal. It was very interesting. But this whole film was really about the brain. It's wonderful. If you haven't seen it, watch it, Young Frankenstein. So now the science, we get into some numbers. I did touch on this in my previous talk, but I think this one slide is important because in our brains, all of our brains, except maybe Homer, 100 billion neurons. 100 billion neurons firing in our brains. That makes 100 trillion synapses, and that's when they talk to each other. So when you think you have that much going on in there, it explains when someone has brain damage through an illness or an injury, there's a lot left there, and it can be reassigned. When people become blind, for instance, later in life, and for a while they can still see, they can still imagine those images, and then they fade. And they have the darkness, and then something happens. Those neurons that were firing for visual things switch to auditory or other sensory things, and suddenly they can do amazing things. There is a biologist who has categorized the different kinds of shells on snails, over 1,000, totally blind. He's written a book on it, totally blind. His fingers got so sensitive, he could feel it and he could talk about it. Einstein, I can't get away from, obviously, when you talk about things like creativity in the brain. He says creativity is intelligence having fun. And it is fun. When you even make a simple little thing, it makes you feel better. It just makes you feel better. So this is a key component to intelligence. Intelligence should not feel like work when it's using creative thought. They are distinct and they are different. This slide at the top is so true. Think of how many people you know who on the outside look one way, and then when you get to know them, they're a whole different person inside. This slide shows it so beautifully. And then, of course, the picture on the left is kind of trite. You can't see the forest for the trees, but people that look for the trees will not see the image. I've shown this to a number of people. Not everyone sees the face. So it tells how we think. It tells what we're looking for. Once again, and this is the crux of Einstein's thinking, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. That was written some time ago. It's pretty apropos. So this creative response is the antidote to individualism, consumerism, and cynicism. Or you could just say modern culture. We have a collective mind. Some of us tap into that more than others. My friend Pee-wee was quite successful at that in some ways. But this is our human spirit. This is what we all share. And that's why this is not just for a few people. When I speak about creativity, I see everyone. I don't just see a few painters or a few designers. And you're always looking for new ways to release it. And that's why art is constantly evolving. We can't get to a point where we just stop and everybody goes, oh, that's the best art. That's all we're going to ever have. Because someone will think of the next thing. And so if you're not going for the next thing, my thinking is you're not an artist. You're not being creative. So when I graded artwork, by the way, I never put a grade on a piece of artwork. I'm proud of that. But I did have to grade it for the book. And I was very conscious that they were looking for something new and something different. And honestly, the technical part of it was not as important for me. It was the thinking part. So I have a young painter here who, much like Dalí, was painting his favorite subject. But just like Dalí as a young artist, he copied people. He copied Picasso. He copied Cézanne. He copied other artists to get a feel of what it was like to be them. And then he could put that together and create Salvador Dalí. They still haven't come up with the creativity quotient, but someday we may have it and a way to measure it in a way that we can put a number on it like we do for an intelligence quotient. Look at how successful he was in multiple styles. They're all good, aren't they? And then this is another way it can happen. This is social personality. It's a way that a lot of scientists are trying to measure creativity right now. This young elephant obviously had a guru-type friend, and he's adopted some of his philosophy. He's adopted it to such a level that it's changed the way he appears. That's the way it works. This is kind of a humorous slide, but that's the way it works. We learn from others. We mirror them. We have mirror neurons, and that's how we do it. We copy other people, we mix it together with us, and we come up with our new us. So this little elephant has a bright future. Personality traits, such as independence of judgment, self-confidence, attraction to complexity, aesthetic orientation, and risk-taking is a big one, are used as measures of creativity in individuals. And you can see what Darth Vader is saying to his son. He is his social personality. So let's talk about Dalí for a moment. This is a beautiful picture of Dalí, so serene. And a lot of people don't think of Dalí this way, but his mind was serene. His outward ability to astound people and have physical attributes that sometimes surprised people, most of that was controlled. It probably had an impulse somewhere in his mind to do those kinds of things, but he could control it when he wanted to. He could be very serious when he wanted to. But I love this picture of him in his dream world. He loved that world, and he brought that world into his conscious mind. That's really what Dalí has taught us. That's why so many people come to see his work here, is to understand the mind of Dalí. So these images came from boundary between sleeping and waking. So that left and right brain dissolved for Dalí. It didn't work that way. He was able to associate elements and use symbols in new and different ways. You didn't get bored if you saw another egg in another Dalí painting. It appeared differently. It had a different purpose, a different function. And so he could reinvent one concept over and over. And sleep's important. In fact, REM sleep aids in this process. That's actually when our brains are putting things together and figuring things out. So sleep more. Sleep more. It actually helps. Let things happen, because when you're asleep and you're not having all these external stimulations, you actually let your mind wander back and forth and create things you wouldn't think of with your eyes open. So it's very important to do. This REM sleep allows neocortical structures to reorganize. And that's a real fancy way for them to say that putting different concepts together to come to a new conclusion. And it happens when we're not even awake. A lot of us think that's downtime. Believe it or not, that's your most creative time. So Dalí experimented in many ways to generate and capture these fantastic images. I'm sure we've heard about most of them, a lot of them anyway, in this museum. There's one person who's really been involved in the idea of creative thinking. He's written these 4 books, Thinker Toys, Cracking Creativity, Think Pack, and Creative Thinkering, and at one of them, he wrote about Dalí and talked about his way of conjuring up these extraordinary images from his subconscious. And he broke down the little story about the spoon and the plate and went to a little more detail. So this is something that we can all apply. 1, think about your challenge. Consider your progress, your obstacles, your alternatives, and so on. Then push it away and relax. So get that left brain business out of the way, because that's where we worry. Worrying doesn't do anything. It's like a drain. So get the worrying out of the way. Go ahead and worry and think about it. Get it out of the way. And then relax. And go to the second step. And that's to relax your whole body. If you need to lie down, if you need to sit in a chair, whatever you need to do, relax your whole body. And what Dalí did, of course, is sit in a chair with a spoon in his hand until he relaxed so much he released it. The last thing you quiet is your mind. Silent films are beautiful when you watch them without any of the music. They're just beautiful. They still convey everything to you, and it's done without any sound. We've kind of lost that in our society now. My daughter recently got back from India and said something very interesting that I never heard before. I said, what's the biggest difference between the two cultures? It's a loaded question, it's a huge question. And she said, it's quieter here. It's quieter here, at least in the cities. It's very noisy there compared to our cities. I never really thought about that. Maybe if I lived in the center of New York, I wouldn't be thinking that way. But it is very quiet here. I think that's why so many of us love living here. There isn't a lot of external noise that's generated. Quiet your eyes. You really need to quiet your eyes to the point that you're not being driven by your visual stimuli. You have to get to the point that you're breaking that wall and allowing your brain to function the way it's really functioning already on its own. You just need to realize it. And then, when you do awaken, record your things immediately. If you're a musician, you might want to play a few notes. If you're a writer, you might want to jot something down. And if you're an artist, you might want to do whatever. If you are a child care person, you might think of a better way to read a story or to take care of a child, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. But write it down, because especially as we get older, those things are fleeting, aren't they? So often, I get up in the morning and I go, Dawn, I thought of this, just a minute, and it's gone. But if I had written it down first, I could say, I'm going to read you this, and it's pretty amazing. So dreaming is very important. The way Willy Wonka put it was, we are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams. We all are. So look for the links in your dreams. Look for the data. Look for what you're getting. If you're seeing a purple dog swimming in your pool, why would I put those things together? It seems so divergent. Why would I put those things together? You start thinking that way, it might lead you to a new answer. And now we're going to get into the world of art for a little bit. And again, I'm covering a lot of ground in a few slides, so bear with me. But data, minimal, and conceptual art all share one thing, that the idea or the concept is more important than the finished product. That still goes on today. I don't know where it's going to go in the future. None of us do. But it will evolve in the future too. But here are some utilitarian items. And by changing one thing or displaying it in a different place, it changes the whole concept. In the 60s, this is when I grew up as a young artist, you could do things like this. Just make a sign, declare yourself an artist, and that's your art. Dalí in the center, you probably recognize that came from What's My Line. And then there's minimal art, where we have a minimal of visual stimuli, but it allows your mind to expand and think about greater things. I think Mondrian might have been a little upset if he saw this, but I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. This happens to be one of my pieces. I'm proud of this because it's a very involved, complicated piece, but it has a very minimal feel to it because the medium and the materials are the reality. Those are common everyday items, stools and tables and lamps and things, but when you cover them all with razor blade and silver paint, it's a whole different concept. And to make that probably took me 2 years. And it really only has one idea. So sometimes you have to take time too. Let things germinate. Take your time. It doesn't have to happen in one sitting or 2 sittings. These are some pieces also that should not refer to anything other than themselves. This is dripping paint. These are razor blades arranged in rows. That's all it is. You don't have to have a greater meaning, and you can still appreciate it and still enjoy it. The muse idea did not disappear in the 20th century. Dalí and others of the surrealists survived and revived the idea, and actually books were written about Dalí and his muses. This piece he created for one of his muses, Gala, his wife, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces of jewelry he did design. It's just exquisite. And on seeing this and working with the project that I did with Yvonne recently, it inspired me to reinvent a sculpture that we had made a few years ago and do it similar to what Dalí did with gems I added a few mirrors as well. This is called the eye of perception. This gives multiple meanings because we have many ways of seeing each individual viewer in it. When a child stands in front of this, he not only sees the reflection in the central mirror, the way we're used to seeing, but there's about 100 convex mirrors that all show a different portion of his body in a different way. And then the gems surrounding it reflect and refract light so that we get color and we get the light broken down. So we're really talking a lot about science, but it's also talking about personality and how we perceive ourselves. So this is a wonderful example that if I hadn't known about Dalí, I probably never would have produced this. Here's a few detail shots. Over 6,000 crystals. Peter, I think every time I ordered another 1,000, he thought, when is this going to end? But it did finally come to an end, I'm glad to say. And this is where it's located. This is the Traveling Museum. I was joined by another sculptor, Kevin Brady, who put some artwork in there, wonderful pieces, and then by the Vitale brothers to do a mural on the outside, and then finally the film. If you haven't seen this little film called Dalí on the Fly, it's on our YouTube site. It's only 8 minutes. Watch it. It was made for elementary age children, but honestly, I've seen it 50 times. I love it. It's just beautiful. So this is kind of the inside and the outside layout of it. We had so many creative people working on it. And then, of course, embedded 8 Dalí paintings in there as well. So these children, in about 30 minutes of their life, are inundated with so much creative information. It's astounding. And then they go back to their classroom and start doing this. This was the first class of the first group to go through the new Dalí Mobile. 40 to 50,000 students are going to see this in 4 years. That's a lot of creativity. But it takes a lot of creative teachers and a lot of people to put this thing together. So when you work together, you really get that cohesive piece of creative work that can even evolve further than each individual can do on their own. But when you talk to people in general, this is like one of those post-polling polls where, you know, what people think or what they believe. Well, when people are interviewed, only 1 in 4 believes they're even close to living out their creative potential. And this is pretty much across the board in our society, maybe not in the whole world, but in our Western society. And that's pretty sad, because creativity is not just for a few people. We're all born with it, we all have it. And when we use it, we feel good. And why do we stop using it? That's a good question. Dalí says, you have to systematically create confusion. It sets creativity free. Everything that is contradictory creates life. I think that's my love affair with Dalí right there. And art, for me anyway, is the absence of fear. Fear is what keeps all of us from doing creative things in our life. Period. That's it. It's a negative thing. So the less fear you have, the more wonderful things you do and the better you feel. An essential aspect of creativity is not being afraid to fail. And when you think of something like a standardized test that you're facing in 3rd grade these days, and if you don't get to a certain level, you're not only a failure, but your teacher's a failure, your parents are failures, and your school's a failure. We have that happening right in our county right now. How sad is that? We should be throwing creative people into those places and saying, do whatever you want. Get these kids thinking. Go for it. Instead of give them another test and make them go 1 point higher. Sorry, but I had to say that. This is how Edison thought. Edison and Tesla were not buddies. They were in competition, and yet they both were wonderful in their own way. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work. So we can replace our fear of the unknown with curiosity. So if you don't know something, it makes you excited. It makes you happy because you've got something to think about now. You've got something to figure out. You've got something new to do instead of just saying, I'm done, I'm over, I know everything I need to know. And this is something too. We all talk about being in the moment or being present in the moment. But what it often does is keep us from seeing things for what they really are. Because instead of seeing things for what they really are, we transpose what we think it should be. It happens to all of us. The less we do that, the better off we'll be. Betty Edwards figured this out in the 1970s. She wrote a book that changed the way teachers teach about drawing. And it was brilliant. She called it drawing on the right side of the brain. But here is the simple little thing that Betty thought of that changed the world of drawing. This was in her workbook. And you have children or anyone draw a picture of that horse right side up. And you take that off their desk, you put one upside down and say, don't move it, draw it. The drawings instantly got better. And not with 2 or 3, even the best artists in the room got better. The reason is, instead of trying to draw a picture of a horse, they were drawing shapes and lines and where it fit on the paper, and they were more accurate when they weren't blocked by that left brain vision. I held this up in front of one of my classes once that were having a hard time with creativity, and I said, what is this? And then I waited. It took almost a half hour. I'm sure they thought I was crazy. But they started talking amongst themselves until finally, one brilliant student said, I know what it is, Mr. Petersburg, I know what it is. I said, what? He said, it's some black ink on a piece of paper. And I went, yes, that's what it is. It's not a horse. If I had a horse in here, you would know it. This is not a horse, but it broke them free. They went, oh, now I get it. And then we started making art. It was amazing. Dalí says, have no fear of perfection, you'll never reach it. Martha Graham would argue that point, and you got to admit she got pretty close. But no one can be perfect, so why worry about it? You be the best you can be, but then you go to the next thing, and you don't worry about that one. Beautiful minds inspire others. Dalí does this for us, but anybody can do this. We can inspire our neighbors, our friends, our spouses, our children. People you don't even know on a bus, you can inspire. Just by the way you are, the presence that you have. One of my favorite philosophers, who I still read, by the way, I can just read them faster now. Sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. Why fit in when you were born to stand out? Dr. Seuss was a genius, and he could speak to children even. But unfortunately, most of the adults that read the books didn't know it was about them too. It's about all of us. Dalí solved an amazing problem when he painted this Lincoln painting. It was in a hotel room. You could see him sitting there painting. He said, when you get back 20 meters, you can really see the image clearly because of your peripheral vision. It's true, but he didn't have 20 meters. So he bought binoculars and turned them backwards. Simple solution, complex problem, creativity. The best way to predict your future is to create it. Abraham Lincoln. So this thinking has been going on for a while. We're just starting to figure out now the science of it. Here's a man who has been criticized for some reasons, but you can't criticize his creativity. He was free to think and create, and he was free to fail. When you hear the business news and say they reduced a new iPhone and it didn't sell the way it was supposed to sell, and suddenly you're supposed to think, oh, then it wasn't very good, something didn't happen. No, something amazing happened. They took it a step further, and then they're going to take it a step further than that. And the number that sold doesn't affect the creativity. It does affect the bottom line, but if that's all you look at, that's not being creative. So you have to find a way to look at both. This says a thing about teaching and learning. The teacher has the concept. She has a clear concept of what it is. And you can see that the frontal lobe in Homer, once again, is somewhere else. Tony Wagner, and I'll try to get going. I know we have to wrap this up soon. But he said, he wrote a book, Creating Innovators, the Making of Young People Who Will Change the World. because the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. Just read this on your own. I remember when we were getting trainings years ago about realizing we had disabled children or special needs children in our classroom. And they tried to categorize the 10 different kids or whatever. And my colleague said a brilliant thing. He said, well, don't we all have disabilities of some sort? Everyone in the room got quiet. And the instructor said, you're right. We need to care about everybody. I thought that was brilliant. This little guy had a big problem to solve. In arid land, we need to get water home. I need to take a lot of water. It's way too heavy for me to carry, so I'm going to have to take 110 trips. Or put it in a drum and I can pull it and do it in one load. That is brilliance. That is creativity at work. And it gives purpose to us. It gives us a purpose in life. And what do we hear all over the world is, why are we here? What is our purpose? Well, guess what? The more creative you are, the closer you get to understanding that. And be careful, you can choose different paths. They're not all easy. But sometimes the stormy one is the one that you learn from. So don't always go the easy way. And now, the relation between creativity and these areas, we're drawing to a close here, but these are really important things, have really focused my thinking on this. One, general intelligence. We've arrived at a point where we have humanoid robots that are getting so realistic, even in their expression and their response, that 2001 is now. And we are going to have to somehow be able to identify the robots that they are not human, because it won't be obvious at the beginning. We're arriving at a really interesting point, because robots aren't creative. They only do what we tell them. And we're going to have to face that at some point. Mental and neurological processes. It happens in all primates. And in fact, this group of primates mimic the other group of primates, and vice versa. I found that very interesting. Personality type and creative ability. Well, we know the person on the top kind of lives in a split personality world. But look at the artist on the bottom. She admits, there's many of me. There's many different versions of me. And this is the way she visually talks about it. Creativity and mental health. We are healthier if we are creative. And that's being documented now. Everything I'm putting down here was not from my head. I've researched it. I've discovered it from people that have been doing this research. And they can back it up. So Wagner says, you must first and foremost be a creator. So here's our tutorial. We're almost done. Shut out the noise. Find your way to do it. These people have found their ways. Dalí almost died finding his, but find your way to shut out the noise. And you can do this. Just turn the TV off for a minute. Or close a window if there's a siren outside. It doesn't take a lot, but quiet your world down a little bit. Then believe in yourself and what you can do. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But something every day. Continue to learn. Einstein said, once you stop learning, you start dying. So this goes on forever. Think of Grandma Moses starting her painting career after the age of 80. And she did okay. Redefine failure and embrace iteration. Well, we've seen lips everywhere in Dalí's work. It's been copied by other artists. But they're all unique, and they're all important. So doing things over and over again will not be repetitive if they change slightly, if they're applied in a different way. And then have fun. Have fun. Dalí did understand that. He could have fun. He set people up to have fun, not to embarrass them. And of course, Pee-wee's Pee-wee. Practice listening to many different kinds of people and ideas. You may not agree with somebody, but you can learn from them. I would have to say, the teachers I learned the most from is the ones that I thought this when I left their class. I could do better than that. And then I went and did it. Without that teacher, I might have just thought, oh, I'm never going to be a teacher. I'm not going to. But I was so upset about a poor teacher, I thought, maybe I can do better. I can do something about it. And then work hard at whatever you decide to do. Work for mastery. Don't expect perfection, but work for mastery. And then, finally, engage in some self-reflection. Not destructive, but just looking inside yourself and trying to understand who you are. So, I'm not going to read the list again, but we covered all that. Can you believe it? In just about an hour. That was a lot of stuff. And I will just leave you with this one last slide. If the passion for and benefits of creativity are ageless, then imagination, creativity, and innovation cannot just be a young person's game. Here are 3 beautiful examples. Thank you.